What happens when a single piece of paper, yellowed with age, creased from decades of hiding, completely shatters everything someone believed about their entire life? Stop the tape. Stop it right now. Dr. Phil's voice cut through the studio like a blade. His hand trembled as he held the diary page. The woman on the couch had gone pale. The audience froze. Nobody in that room, or watching at home, was prepared for what that page revealed. When Dr. Phil took that diary page in his hands, everyone in the studio held their breath, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. 48 hours earlier, the production team had received what seemed like a routine submission. Sarah Mitchell, 52, wanted to confront her daughter Emma, 28, about disrespectful behavior and cutting off contact. Standard family conflict material. The producers scheduled it, prepped the questions, set the stage. But there was something Sarah's intake form hadn't mentioned. Something Emma had been carrying in silence for 3 decades. Something written in faded ink on a page torn from a diary that no longer existed. The show had started normally enough. Sarah sat on the left side of the couch, perfectly composed in a navy blazer, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She spoke in that practiced, measured tone of someone who'd rehearsed their victim narrative 1,000 times. Dr. Phil, I've tried everything, Sarah said, her voice dripping with maternal suffering. I've reached out. I've apologized for whatever I did wrong. But Emma refuses to see me. Won't return my calls. Blocked me on social media. I just want my daughter back. The audience made sympathetic sounds. This was familiar territory. Another mother devastated by estrangement. Another daughter who couldn't let go of the past. Dr. Phil leaned forward in his chair, using that signature direct stare. And you have no idea why she cut contact? None whatsoever, Sarah replied, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. I gave her everything. The best childhood. Private schools. Dance lessons. I sacrificed my whole life for that girl. But across the stage, behind the curtain, Emma was listening. And her hands were shaking as she clutched a worn envelope containing the diary page. Dr. Phil brought Emma out. The contrast was immediate. Where Sarah was polished and composed, Emma looked like she'd barely slept in weeks. Dark circles under her eyes. Hands twisting nervously. But there was something else in her expression, a kind of quiet steel that comes from carrying an unbearable truth. Emma, Dr. Phil began gently. Your mother says she has no idea why you've cut her out of your life. Can you help us understand? Emma's voice was barely audible. She knows exactly why. Sarah's performance shifted into high gear. Sweetheart, I don't. Please, just tell me what I did. You want to know what you did? Emma's voice suddenly cut through, louder now. You want me to say it on national television? The studio went quiet. Dr. Phil raised a hand. Emma, take your time. Whatever you need to say, this is a safe space. Emma reached into the envelope she'd been clutching. She pulled out a single page, yellowed, creased, the edges frayed from decades of being folded and unfolded. Her hands shook as she held it. When I was 7 years old, Emma began, her voice breaking. I kept a diary. Just a cheap little notebook from the drugstore. I wrote in it every day. About school. About my friends. About what I wanted to be when I grew up. Sarah's face had changed. The composure was cracking. Emma, I don't see what. And I wrote about what you did to me. The air in the studio stopped moving. I wrote about how you told me that what we did in the bathroom was our special secret. How you said if I told anyone, they'd take me away and I'd never see my friends again. How you made me believe it was normal. That all mothers did this with their daughters. Sarah's face went white. The audience gasped. Dr. Phil's expression shifted into something darker, more focused. Emma's voice was shaking now, but she continued. When I was 9, you found my diary. I came home from school and you were sitting on my bed with it in your hands. You ripped out every page that mentioned what you'd done. Burned them in the kitchen sink. I watched every word turn to ash. That's not. Sarah started, but Dr. Phil held up his hand. Let her finish. But you missed one page. Emma held up the yellowed paper. This one. I'd torn it out weeks before because I wanted to show my school counselor. I never had the courage. I kept it hidden in a book. Moved it from house to house for 30 years. Never threw it away because it was the only proof I had that I wasn't crazy. That it really happened. Dr. Phil stood up. I need to see that page. Emma handed it to him with trembling hands. The cameras captured every second as Dr. Phil took the fragile paper, his reading glasses sliding down slightly as he focused on the faded handwriting. Child script. Deliberate letters. Words that no 7-year-old should ever have to write. The studio was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum. Dr. Phil read in silence for what felt like an eternity. His jaw tightened. When he looked up, his eyes had the kind of cold fury that comes from decades of seeing humanity's worst. Stop the tape, he said quietly. Stop it right now. The cameras kept rolling, they always did, but the production team froze. In 15 years of the show, Dr. Phil had never stopped mid-episode like this. He walked over to Sarah, holding the diary page like evidence in a courtroom. Ma'am, I've read what your 7-year-old daughter wrote on this page. And I'm going to ask you one time, and one time only, to tell me the truth. Did you sexually abuse your daughter? The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Sarah's mouth opened and closed. The mask had completely shattered. That's taken out of context. She was a child, she didn't understand. Answer the question. Yes or no? The studio audience was crying. Production assistants stood frozen backstage. Emma's whole body was shaking. Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. It wasn't like that. I was going through a difficult time. Her father had left. I was lonely. I needed. Stop. Dr. Phil's voice could have cut steel. I'm going to stop you right there before you incriminate yourself any further on national television. He turned to the audience, then directly to the camera. I need everyone watching at home to understand something. What we just heard described is not a difficult time or a misunderstanding. It's a crime. It's child sexual abuse. And it's one of the most devastating betrayals a parent can inflict on a child. He turned to his producers. Get the National Child Abuse Hotline information on screen right now. And I want the contact information for Rain ready to go before we come back from break. Subscribe and leave a comment. Because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Dr. Phil turned back to Emma, his voice softening completely. Emma, I want you to look at me. Can you do that? Emma raised her eyes, tears streaming down her face. What you just did took more courage than most people will ever have to show in their entire lives. And I want you to hear me when I say this, none of what happened to you is your fault. Not one single second of it. Do you understand me? Emma nodded, unable to speak. You kept that page for 30 years because somewhere deep inside, even as a little girl, you knew the truth mattered. You knew your story mattered. And you were right. Dr. Phil held up the diary page. This piece of paper represents something more important than evidence. It represents a child's desperate attempt to be believed. To have someone see what was happening and make it stop. He turned to the audience. How many of you in this room, or watching at home, have ever doubted your own memories? Questioned whether something that hurt you really happened the way you remember it? Wondered if maybe you were crazy or making it up? Hands went up across the studio. Heads nodded. That's what abusers do. They don't just hurt you. They make you doubt your own reality. They gaslight you into thinking you can't trust yourself. And that's why Emma held on to this page for 3 decades. Because it was the only thing that couldn't be argued with. It couldn't be revised or reinterpreted or explained away. Dr. Phil walked back to Sarah, who had shrunk into the couch. Ma'am, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear every word. What you did to your daughter has consequences that last a lifetime. The trust you shattered doesn't just grow back. The childhood you stole doesn't get a do-over. And the relationship you're here demanding she give you back? You destroyed that yourself. Sarah started to speak, but Dr. Phil cut her off. I don't say this often, but I'm going to say it now. Some relationships aren't meant to be repaired. Some damage is permanent. And Emma has every right to protect herself from further harm by never speaking to you again. He turned to Emma. And you have my full support in that decision. The audience erupted in applause. Emma collapsed into sobs. But for the first time in the entire hour, they were sobs of relief. During the commercial break, something unprecedented happened. Dr. Phil didn't return to his chair. Instead, he walked Emma backstage, away from the cameras and the audience and her mother. Production assistants scrambled to extend the break. In the green room, Dr. Phil sat down next to Emma, the diary page still in his hand. I'm going to hold on to this for you, he said quietly. Not because you need me to validate what happened, you already know the truth. But because I want you to know that someone believes you. Someone heard you. And someone is standing between you and that woman. Emma wiped her eyes. I didn't know if I could do this. If I could actually say it out loud. You did more than say it. You reclaimed your story. For 30 years, she controlled the narrative. She made you doubt yourself. She made you feel crazy. But the second you held up that page, you took all that power back. He handed the diary page back to her carefully, like it was made of glass. This doesn't belong to her anymore. It belongs to you. And what you do with your story from here is entirely your choice. If you want to press charges, I'll connect you with the best attorneys I know. If you want therapy resources, I've got a whole team standing by. If you just want to walk away and never look back, that's valid too. Emma stared at the page in her hands. I just wanted her to admit it. To stop pretending she didn't know why I left. Well, the whole world just watched her do exactly that. When they returned to stage, Sarah was gone. She'd left during the break, refusing to continue. The producers had footage of her walking out the back exit, ripping off her microphone, ignoring every question. Dr. Phil addressed the camera directly. What you just witnessed is what happens when truth confronts lies. When evidence meets denial. When a survivor stops protecting their abuser's reputation and starts protecting themselves. He held up a card with the National Child Abuse Hotline number. If you're watching this and you see yourself in Emma's story, I need you to call this number. Whether it happened yesterday or 30 years ago, it matters. Your story matters. And there are people waiting right now to believe you. The epilogue came 3 months later. Emma had pressed charges. The local DA had opened an investigation based on her testimony and the diary page. Sarah had been arrested and released on bail pending trial. Emma's story had been picked up by major news outlets, sparking a national conversation about childhood sexual abuse and the statute of limitations. But more than that, Emma had started healing. She'd begun therapy with a trauma specialist Dr. Phil's team had connected her with. She joined a support group for adult survivors. And she'd started writing again, not in secret, not in code, but openly and honestly about what she'd survived and how she was rebuilding. Dr. Phil kept the copy of that diary page on his desk. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful evidence isn't DNA or video footage. Sometimes it's a child's handwriting on a piece of yellowed paper, preserved through decades of doubt and fear and shame, waiting for the moment when someone would finally believe it. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The episode had become one of the most watched in the show's history. Not because of spectacle or drama, but because it represented something millions of survivors had never seen on television: validation, belief, justice. Emma's courage had given voice to countless others who'd been carrying their own hidden pages, their own silent stories, their own decades of wondering if anyone would ever believe them. And that diary page, that fragile, yellowed piece of paper, had become a symbol of something unbreakable: the truth. Because truth doesn't fade with age. It doesn't disappear when someone burns the evidence, or rewrites the narrative or demands you forget. It waits. Patient and persistent. Until the moment someone is finally brave enough to hold it up to the light and say, "This happened. This mattered. And I refuse to pretend anymore." Dr. Phil had seen a lot in his career. But that moment, when Emma held up that page and reclaimed 30 years of stolen truth, that was the moment that reminded him why he did this work. Not for ratings. Not for recognition. But for the Emmas of the world. The ones who'd been silenced and doubted and told their pain didn't matter. Because it did matter. Every word of it. And sometimes, all it takes is one person saying, "I believe you," to change everything.